Yesterday, Friends of the Earth launched a lawsuit against the government of Canada for abandoning its international commitments under the Kyoto Protocol. We believe that climate change is the most urgent crisis ever facing the planet. Therefore, Friends of the Earth is resorting to the courts to require Canada's government to respect its Kyoto promises. While the government talks about turning the corner, in reality, the government has made a serious wrong turn. This will affect the lives of generations to come. We have a government that is not honoring Canadian law, we allege. It also is not taking the experience that shows, of course, there's always a debate. There's been 2 decades of debate about Kyoto. The time we are in history now, we know how very severe climate change is. We know it has to be addressed. We know we need clear signals. Instead, turning the corner provides a set of, it's a regulatory framework that is clearly not going to meet Kyoto. There's 2 things. One, in the case itself, we hope the federal court will provide a declaration that Canada must bring in regulations that work to reduce greenhouse gases according to Kyoto and that are enforced. Secondly, we'd like to send a signal that we have confidence in the potential role we can play in the UN system and that we want Canada to remain within the UN system as it is now for Kyoto and then beyond Kyoto to develop our initiatives around global warming. Till now, Canada has honored and even provided leadership on global environmental agreements like the Montreal Protocol to save the ozone layer, like the Stockholm Protocol to combat persistent organic pollutants. On climate change, clearly Canada is a laggard. The size of our failure is upward of 39% above our target for 2012. Friends of the Earth, represented by Sierra Legal Defense, believes we have a very strong case within our international community of Friends of the Earth groups in 70 countries. We are pleased to have their support to see Canada turn around from its position as a laggard to where we want to be, again, as a leader. And we hope this case will accomplish that. We hope individual Canadians across Canada, in whatever walk of life, will join with us and feel that this is a very important situation.
The legal skirmishes and possibly some setbacks, like the minor setback last night for the Ottawa Senators. But like the Senators, we expect to win the war, in this case the war on climate change.
We're anticipating some skirmishes with the government. This is a very serious situation where an environmental group sues Canada. It is the first country within the all the countries signing on to Kyoto to be sued by its citizens. And so the government should take this very, very seriously. A very unique piece of legislation called Section 166 in that it has a precautionary measure. It talks about violation or likely to violate an international agreement dealing with international air pollution. So we're using, addressing the Canadian law about international air pollution, which then specifies Kyoto.
Il y a si c'est probable que les actions du gouvernement vont contrevenir le droit, il faut faire quelque chose. Et donc c'est plutôt ça, c'est la première fois qu'on utilise la section 166.
Yes, it is a last resort. This is the first case brought against a country for the breach of the Kyoto Protocol. We had to invoke our rights under the international air pollution provisions of CEPA because never before has the executive branch of this government so flagrantly violated an international agreement. On compliance, we have filed this proceeding with the Kyoto Protocol Compliance Committee, who is currently investigating Canada's breach of its obligations under both the Framework Convention and the Protocol. This government is not free to cut and run from its international obligations. Canadians want action to cope with climate change, yet we've seen the government cut the budgets of the science and adaptation and impacts programs, yet we have current obligations to do that sort of work. So the court is being invited to declare that Canada is in breach of its international obligations because Canadians want action.
The first time in the world that citizens have sued their country about Kyoto. For Friends of the Earth, it's the first time in our history of almost 30 years that we have taken the federal government to court. Previously, we have worked in cooperation with governments, but this is so critical. And I must say, regretfully, we've had to take this action in the federal courts to challenge our own government.
About a country being in breach of the Kyoto Protocol. We work with FO International and the Climate Justice Program, which monitors this. It is the first case about Kyoto. And the reason it's so unique is because that provision in CEPA, because it blends the domestic with the international obligations. It goes back to the 1970s, this provision. It's never been used, but that's because no government's been so offensive about our obligations. So yes, it is a landmark case, both domestically and internationally.
The Canadian government is adrift and without leadership on its environmental agenda. There has an important role to play within the UN, and we expect our government to lead us, not be laggards within the UN system.
We want Kyoto.